In 1874, Leo Tolstoy, the famous Russian author, experienced a severe existential crisis. On the surface, he seemed to have everything in life. He had a wife, he had a family, he had wealth, and he had succeeded in his career, having just written the War and Peace. But still, there was something missing in his life, and he was asking himself, why should I live? What real, indestructible essence will come out from this phantasmal, destructible life? Especially after his brother's death, he started to realize that we are all going to be dying sooner or later, so what's the point of struggling? What's the point of doing anything? And he was unable to find any good answer to a question, which meant that when he described this period later on in his diary, he said that as long as he was unable to find the answer to the question of why, my life stopped and I wanted to destroy myself. And this question of meaning of life is as relevant today as it was 200 years ago. In fact, it could be even more relevant today because of a certain paradox as regards this meaning of life. And this paradox, I guess many of you have seen this kind of graph before, that if we measure the gross domestic production of a country and then we measure the life satisfaction levels, average life satisfaction of the country, they usually correlate. So more wealthy countries usually experience more life satisfaction, which makes sense because it's easier to be satisfied with your life when you have food on the table. But recently, Oishi and Diener, these two researchers, they went out and looked at 132 countries and how much meaningfulness people experience in these countries. And interestingly, they found exactly the opposite pattern. The more there was meaning in a country, or the more there was wealth in a country, the less people were experiencing meaningfulness, which is rather a surprising result and something that needs to be explained. But in order to explain this fact, we need to know more about the question, what do we actually ask when we ask about the meaning of life? And when we look at the question itself, we quite soon realize that there's actually two separate questions about this meaningfulness. There's this universal question about meaning of life, which is a question about why does life exist? Why do human beings exist? Why does Earth exist? But that's one question, but then there's a separate question which is more about this personal sense of meaningfulness. What makes my life feel meaningful for me? What makes my life feel significant? And as regards these two questions, as regards this universal question, I'm afraid I have to say that I don't have any good answer to that question. Because whatever answer we try to give to that question, there always seems to be one more why question. Okay, Big Bang, like universe started in a Big Bang, but why did the Big Bang come from? Or where did it come from? Or God created the heaven and the earth, but where did God come from? So however we try to answer the question, there's always this further question about, and it all boils down to the question of why is there something instead of nothing? And as said, I believe that we can never find a good answer to this question. We just have to be lucky that there seems to be somebody here, and there seems to be somebody able to ask these questions. And that brings us to this more personal question about meaning in my life. What makes my life meaningful? And as regards this question, there's also separate ways to understand this question as well. In fact, there seems to be three separate ways to understand it. Firstly, we can think about it as the sense of coherence, sense of life making sense. Some that we understand what is happening in our life and it's not chaotic and unstructured. The second way of understanding this question about meaning in life is about the sense of purpose, having some goals in the future that give meaning to my present day activities, having some future-orientedness in my life. And then the third way of understanding what we mean by meaning in life is about the sense of significance, sense of life having some inherent value, sense of feeling that my life is worth living. And of these three, I would say that this third one, the significance, is the most important, most fundamental, and most burning question. Because this sense of coherence, it's nice to life makes sense, that we understand what is happening, But when we ask about meaning, we also want to evaluate our life, find some positive value in our life. So coherence by itself is not enough. And same goes for purpose. It might be a strong way of feeling that my life is significant, but at the same time, many of our life's most meaningful moments are moments when we are present in the present moment and not thinking about any future-oriented goals. So the significance is the most fundamental question we can ask about meaning in life. It's also the most fundamental question of philosophy, at least if we ask the existentialists like Albert Camus, who said that judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the most fundamental question of philosophy. That he was saying that unless we can find a good answer to that question, why should we ask any other question? Shouldn't we first try to figure out the answer to this question, and only after that we should move on to these more trivial other questions? So now we know more about the question itself, but in order to answer this paradox, we have to look also at the history of the question. Because quite often, when we think about this question of meaning of life, we think about it as some kind of eternal question that has bothered mankind since the beginning of humankind. But actually, the phrase itself, meaning of life, was invented quite recently. Only in 1834, Thomas Carlyle was the first man who mentioned it in the literature, this British author. And quite soon after him, there was Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, who was also speaking about meaning of life. And then there was Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, who was writing in German language and using the phrase der Sinn des Lebens, which also translates into meaning of life. So there seemed to be something happening in the 19th century that really made this question very burning and relevant. And what was then happening there? Of course, in the 19th century, there were many important developments. There was the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, people traveling more. But I would argue that the most significant change that happened in the 19th century was the rise of the scientific worldview. That the scientific worldview became more and more relevant, and it started to replace this religious worldview in many people's minds. And this is actually what happened to these Thomas Carlyle, to Søren Kierkegaard, to Arthur Schopenhauer, and to Tolstoy. All of them abandoned religion, or then they struggled with their faith. And after this struggle with their faith, this question of meaning of life became very salient and burning for them. And this is actually the same result that these Oy and Diener found. I said that they looked at the 132 countries and found this negative correlation between meaningfulness and wealth. And when they tried to look for explanations for that correlation, they realized that actually they looked at several factors, and the most important factor that they found was exactly religiosity. That the more wealthy countries had were less religious countries, and because of that, they also seemed to experience less meaning in life. And what they found out also was that meaning in life itself was connected to the suicide rate of the country. That the countries where people experienced less meaning in life were countries where people had higher suicide rates, which really goes to show that this question is about whether or not life is worth living. So now we know more about the question, but I guess what quite many people want to know at this point is, what will be then the answer to this question? Especially, where to find the answer to this question if one is not able to find it from religion anymore. That many people in today's world, they are not able to find it from the religious authorities anymore, and they are looking for an answer. And where can they find this answer then? And I would argue that the best bet that we can have in this situation is to look at human psychology. Look at what are the factors that human beings across the world universally seem to value, seem to be very motivated to pursue. And then identify those factors, and those should be the factors that might be what gives significance and this sense of worth to our lives. And I could tell long stories about the empirical research on the topic, both by myself and by others, but instead I will give you a one-sentence answer. And the one-sentence answer to the question of meaning of life that I came up with already several years ago was this: Meaning in life is about making yourself meaningful to other people. So the way that my life becomes meaningful is when I'm feeling that I'm able to somehow be meaningful to other people. And there's basically two different ways that I can be meaningful to other people and I can connect to other people. That firstly, I can connect to other people through this sense of relatedness. That when I have some deep relationships in my life, these are usually very meaningful. When I'm with my loved ones, when I'm with my family, when I'm with my friends, they are what usually gives my life meaning. And also, because of our deep relationship, I can be meaningful to them just by being there. But at the same time, there's another dimension to this connecting to other people, which is more about this sense of contribution. Being able to have some kind of positive impact in the life of the other people, being able to help other people. And if you think about these prototypical examples of meaningful living, like Nelson Mandela, or Abraham Lincoln, or Martin Luther King, what unites them all is that all of them have made a huge contribution towards the mankind. That in one way or other, they had this huge contribution, and that's why their life is regarded so meaningful. So this contribution is another strong way of finding my life meaningful, if I'm able to make some contribution towards other people. But then later on, at some point, I realized that this is only half the answer to the question of what makes life meaningful. And I realized this when William Damon, this professor of psychology at Stanford, he was telling the story about the surgeon that he met. And this surgeon happened to be one of the primary experts on certain heart surgery, which meant that he was saving human lives on a regular basis. He went to work, he came back home, and he could again say that, again, I saved one human life. So in this sense, it's hard to find an occupation that would be more meaningful. But at the same time, the same guy had a hard time getting out of bed in the morning and getting to work because he really started to hate his work. And the reason he started to hate his work was because he felt that it's actually not his thing. That he had become a surgeon because his parents were doctors, so after high school it was natural to go to medical school. In medical school he was good, so it was natural to become a surgeon. So he had gone through this pipeline without never stopping to think what he really wants to do in life. And when he finally stopped to think about what he wants to do in life, he realized that he wants to do something completely different than be a surgeon. So that's what he did. He quit his career and went to another field. And the point of the story is that in order to experience meaning in life, it's not enough that you connect to other people. You also have to connect to yourself. As some wise person has said, it's better to be yourself because everybody else is already taken. So based on that, I have revised my answer to the question of where does this meaning in life come from. So in addition to this sense of connecting to other people, we also need to have this sense of self-realization, that we are able to realize ourselves somehow through our lives. And there's also two dimensions to this self-realization. Firstly, there's this sense of autonomy, being able to do things that I myself find interesting, that I myself find valuable, feeling that I'm able to do things that express who I really am as a person. So this is an important part of self-realization, but it alone is not enough, because we also need to feel this sense of competence in our activities. That if we are not able to accomplish anything, it doesn't matter how much we are interested in the thing, but if we all the time fail in the activity, it doesn't bring this sense of self-realization. So only when we find things that we find interesting, that we find valuable, and then we are able to feel this sense of competence, that we are able to be effective in our workings, accomplish something, then we have this sense of self-realization. And accordingly, nowadays, the best possible answer that I'm able to give to you about what makes life meaningful is that it's about these two things. It's about the sense of self-realization and the sense of connecting to other people. That we need both of them in order to feel a sense of meaningfulness. And accordingly, the one-sentence answer to the question of meaning in life that I'm going to leave you with is this. Meaning in life is about doing things meaningful to you in a way that makes yourself meaningful to other people. Thank you.